All right, so now let's get into it a little bit more on mid-side EQ, because this is a very, very useful and very common thing beyond just standard EQ moves. It allows you to process the center and sides of a stereo track independently. Just to review, you should have learned in Mixing Fundamentals 1 what mid-side is, but essentially mid and side is a way of encoding a stereo audio file that instead of just left and right channels, it puts all of the information in the signal that's mono in one channel and all the information in the signal that's stereo into another. So it was invented in 1931 by a guy named Blumlein. It was originally developed both as a matrixing technique for left and right audio, as well as a mic technique. The benefit it has over other mic techniques is that it maintains perfect mono compatibility when set up right, unlike other techniques such as AB or XY stereo. And as a stereo audio encoding technique, it has the benefit of enabling you to widen or narrow the stereo image simply by adjusting the gain of the side channel up or down. I'm not going to get too deep into the history of it. I'll link you a video on it that sort of gives a history and dives deeper into the concept. Pretty cool to watch if you want to get nerdy. It's actually a really easy equation. There's a little bit more math involved with like the gain levels, but really it's left plus right is mid. Left minus right is sides. So that's really kind of it. That simple equation for creating mid and side from left and right is also why you will sometimes hear mid called sum and sides called difference. So sum channel and difference channel, meaning the sum of left, right, side channel, meaning the difference between left and right. What the real benefit of mid-side is it lets you think of, rather than having to adjust stuff from the left and the right, it keeps all of your stereo information as you're making adjustments to it, like EQ, or you can even mid-side compress. You can do pretty much anything in mid-side. It allows you to deal with your stereo field as like one whole. So all the stereo content at once, rather than having to deal with independent left, right, and trying to balance all that stuff. What mid-side is useful for is like widening a mix by boosting the sides, or controlling the bass by keeping low frequencies in the center and not on the sides, cleaning up muddiness in the mid-range while maintaining like a lush stereo image on the stereo side. Anyway, it has a lot of good uses. We're going to go through a few of them right now. Okay, so here's a first example of where mid-side EQ is, and this is a very common example. I've got a very wide unison Reese pad, so it is, as you can see here, using span in mid-side mode. And another fantastic tool, which I highly recommend from Voxengo that's also free, is MSED. This is a mid-side encoder decoder. What this allows you to do is this, in its basic use case, will encode your stereo audio into mid-side and decode it as it leaves the plugin. So this gives you a control of your mid and your side. But right now we're going to use it just for muting sides, showing the stereo correlation, and showing the image. So as I play back, you can see here how the stereo image is not correlated at all. It's going into anti-phase, which you can see here from the red coming over the green, and we're all over the map with it. Same thing with the correlation meter down here. So how do we get this? This isn't going to mono out well, because as soon as I mono this signal, we lose so much of that information because that's gone. Anything you see in red is canceling out in mono. So how do we fix that? Well, one of the easy ways to do it with an EQ is just taking any sort of parametric EQ with mid-side functionality, like our stock Ableton EQ here. And what I've done is put it into mid-side mode, gone and added a low cut up at around 150 hertz. Really, it's up to taste, depends on how much of that you're trying to preserve. But now what happens as I play it back, you can now see, even though we see some anti-phase up at the top, you see our correlation meter is very happy. It is not dipping into the negative phase at all. It's not going anti-phase. And now, when I mono this, you retain a lot more of that information. So by contrast, turn this on while it's in mono, brings back that low end. But there's also another way that I like to handle monoing low end, or at least just making it more mono compatible. So if you notice as we play this sound, it has a lot of unique textural qualities where the phase beating is occurring that we kind of lose when it's put into mono. So this is going to be splitting the shelves on an EQ. So again, I've got a stock Ableton EQ in mid-side. What I've done here is I have used a shelf higher up. Right now, the shelf is at about 400 hertz, and I pulled it down by about 4 dB. And then on the mid channel, I've pushed it up about 4 dB. So let's hear the difference that makes. Now, magic comes when I mono it. Compared to we still have that width, we still have that uniqueness, but we're keeping our correlation meter very happy, and a lot more of it translates over into mono. There's really a bunch of different ways how to go about EQing to keep mono compatibility. One of those ways that I really like to use in conjunction is a combination of mid-side EQing and just controlling the balance of the mid and sides. So on that same example with this Reese, what I'm going to do is I'm going to engage our basic low cut on the sides that we have here. And then what I'm going to do is use MSED after that, and I'm just simply going to push up the mids by about 3 dB and pull the sides down by about 3 dB. So in stereo, it'll sound like this. And that's without any of it on. Sounds roughly the same. But watch what happens when I play this in mono. Now that folds almost perfectly into mono. We have all of the bass, which would disappear if I took this off, losing a lot of that. I have a stable bass, and now a lot of those highs are gone if I take the MSED off. So these two in combination really gives you the best of both worlds. And so I think it's a very powerful tool to use these in concert with one another. So another good example of where mid-side EQing is helpful is just for a really quick fix on this mix. I have this hip-hop example here. I want it to be a little bit more wide, but say I didn't have the stems, or it was a bus of something that was rendered down, and I don't have the ability to go in and do it with individual instruments, or this also works in a mastering context, but we'll get into that later. So here it is. I'd like to hear it a little bit wider. So what I can do is load up our free TDR Voss Slick EQ, great shelving EQ, good for broad and gentle adjustments. So I'm going to enable that. And then I'm going to play this back as I push up just the sides. As you see here, I've got it set to the difference channel, which is, again, that's our sides, sum and difference, sum being mono, difference being sides. And let's start playing it back and hear what happens when I push it up. Now let's A/B that on and off. This is an extreme example, but just to give you the idea. Off. On. So you can hear the depth that it adds just by pushing up the side information. Now it creates this width that we didn't have before, and is a very quick and easy way to add a little bit more width to the top end that I wanted to have. So here's another example of where I find mid-side EQing very helpful. So on this same example, the one we just pushed the sides up on the whole mix, say I wanted to have with just that instrument lead, which is going to be this guitar and synth melody group, I wanted to have a little bit more of the fundamental tones of those reinforced in the mids, leave the drums alone, but create more width in the overall mix without adding any width to the drums or any of the other elements. Well, that's where mid-side comes in. So playing this, I'm going to open our free Ozone 11 EQ, and I've got it into mid-side mode here. Then let's listen back and see how we can achieve pushing up the fundamentals in the mids, but also allowing the upper frequencies to be a little bit wider. So right now I'm going to be on the side channels. So I'm going to do my boost to the highs here on the sides. Now, to reinforce those fundamentals, I'm going to take just the mid band and I'm going to put a very broad bell filter in here. Now, when we listen to that all together, compared with it, A, B, you hear how it's all of a sudden adding a lot more reinforcement to those fundamental tones. In the context of the whole mix, that's going to sound like this. So now you can hear how, as I'm adding that back in, now you can hear it makes those synth notes sound a little bit more stable, a little bit more present, but still adds that width that we were looking for over the whole mix. So just to reiterate, you can hear now how those cut a little bit more through the mix, and I've still got that width that I wanted on the sides that we tried to add to the whole mix. You can see that mid-side EQ is extremely versatile for being able to control stereo image, fix problems, and do creative mixing choices.